Hi, LSA.
Yes.
Good morning to you in Nigeria, or it's afternoon over there. Hello.
So. Can you hear?
Hello.
We can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you, Prof. Good
Yeah,
morning.
can you hear the music too? Can you hear the music?
No, so I also want them to no. So I also wanted them to play short music during my presentation. It's part of the reason I was trying to chat them up.
Okay, so if you want them, okay. Anyway, we are here. We're waiting for other panelists. Okay, it's
Okay.
yeah. So we probably start in the next 7 minutes to get people in. People are coming from
Okay.
lunch. Yeah.
Okay. And thank you for all you do for us at the conference. The good reports are all over the place.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot for the compliments.
Hi, David.
Hi, Dr. Osnori, can you hear me? Good morning.
Yes, I can hear you. I need a favor from you, and I have sent it to the chat. Just the opening of these two music is what I want played at some point in the presentation.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Mr. Abitoe, good morning. Thank you for joining.
Yes, good evening from here. Be here.
Yeah.
Good evening, Pro.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening.
Thank you very much, Bro.
Someone told me I'm having a mini conference in the middle of a LSA conference. And I said, what do you mean by that? He said, Prof presentation is like a keynote lecture or an
No,
important,
you can't tell. People
I
are
however
like,
you did that.
You can't tell.
Exactly, exactly.
I thought I knew because I know his words and the value he brings, but I didn't mean it to be a mini conference. But if it is, then I'm thankful.
Thanks for the compliment.
And thank you. Your mentorship means a lot to me. And creating to present in this panel in the middle of the biggest conference on the continent, it's valuable to me.
Thanks for the kind words. Yeah, we just wait a bit because people are just settling back. You know how it is. So.
Yeah, my spouse. Station. Yeah. She came to my school I was really encouraged. She that was so semester. I didn't know I never heard about it. Just in nature, like happenstance. Yeah, I didn't really I'm not supposed to spend things with your owner with your book home. So I mean that's my
No, we're not scared. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. I know you've been running.
Yeah, running around. Yeah. So, I,
Doesn't matter where we sit.
it doesn't matter. That's exactly so.
Hi, so those joining us online will start shortly at the LSA there in Lagos. People are just coming in from lunch, and we just thought to wait just a few more moments. In 2 minutes, we'll start. Thank you for your patience.
My play, but let her be on boss. Let her ask her if she can hear the music.
Somebody can you do music?
Hey, no, we can start
No, I
without you.
can't.
You can hear the music on the background.
So I think I'll just go ahead and start.
Okay.
Please. No.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let us start.
I want to believe that Dr. Bali is in the building. Is that correct? The fourth presenter.
Thank you.
Maybe he will join us shortly, but kindly let me know through the comments, through the chat box when he arrives in the building. And so,
I think I can see him as part of the attendees. I can see
oh
his name
really?
on there.
Why is he on the attendee list? Can you kindly
Great.
bring him to the platform?
I think we're all here. Oh.
I'll just go ahead and start. Welcome everyone to the celebratory panel in honor of Professor Christopher Waterman's book, The 35 Years of his field-defining work, and particularly Juju, a social history and ethnography of an African popular music, published about 35 years ago. Just a brief remarks about what animated organizing this panel, and I think I'm running ahead of time. I think I need to introduce myself. So my name is Rosemary Oyinlola Popola, and part of the very idea that animated or inspired and motivated me to organize this panel is in continuing with LSA's vision of intergenerational collaboration. And that is informed by the idea of seeing knowledge as a continuity rather than, always what we claim in our work as departure and all of that. And just as Akinwumi argued in his book on Everything is Sampled, that there's a sense in which there is a historicity of form. Uh, every form of cultural production, just like knowledge itself, it's a continuation. It's you know a sort of collaboration, expanding, extending in whatever language we want to add to that. But it's sort of a form of collaboration. I thought that as a scholar, an early career scholar in the field of African popular music who is trying to do something different, something also building on the work of Professor Waterman's book that has been field defining and one of the most cited book on popular music, I thought is important as part of continuing in the tradition of LSA's intergenerational collaboration to honor its field-defining work. So having said that, I will go into reading the bio of each of our presenters, and afterwards they will make their presentation. After their presentation, we will then open up the floor for question and answer. The presentation definitely will go in the order as it appears on the program. And so I will dive into that. The first person on our list is no stranger to the community and even to those watching us here online. I thought about two things to do to read his citation, which he sent about half a page. But then I thought he's like a masquerade, someone that depending on the side in which you turn it, you sort of see a different image of him. To many, he's a scholar whose research has earned him many awards. For others, he's a father. For others, he's a colleague. But for me, he's a mentor and a sponsor. I want to say a brief story before inviting him to make his presentation. Right in the year 2017, a young girl in Nigeria decided she was quitting academia due to all of the factors we know happen in every corner in every corner of the academy, whether it's in Nigeria or it's in the US. And so this young girl was privileged to have been paired with him to be a mentor. And part of the thing she was determined on doing, on ending her first PhD, was to quit academia because she definitely believed she doesn't belong in the academia. But this man, Professor Said Adenrito, the president of the Lagos Studies Association, convinced her that she has so much to offer to the academy and that she's made for what she thinks she's made for, and particularly the academy will be enhanced and enriched by her contribution. That young lady today is in the United States completing a second PhD, publishing cutting-edge research and making her own little difference in the corner of the world. That little girl is none other than myself. And so without further story, I'd like to present to some, introduce to other, the indefatigable president of the Lagos Studies Association, Professor Said Adenrito. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, for inviting me to present to your panel, and more importantly, for that great introduction. I wasn't expecting that it's going to go all the way back to 2017 to explain how we got to meet and the little contribution I've made to your career. So Christopher Waterman is not the first scholar to write about African popular music. However, he is the first to truly demonstrate the beauty of a truly multidisciplinary approach to studying African popular music. Before the appearance of this book, 35 solid years ago, as one would expect, scholarship on African music centered purely around musicology. Most studies are musicological. And in this case, I'm thinking about the pioneering works of Akin Uba and, of course, the late Obidike. Waterman brought out the beauty of African popular music scholarship by merging the best of musicology, the best of ethnography, the best of ethnomusicology, and of course, the best of history. In fact, to some scholars, he also was able to integrate popular culture with urban studies. His book laid the foundation for me on how to understand popular music, especially from the dimension of the emergence of Lagos as one of the biggest urban centers or locations in Africa. Christopher Ottoman demonstrates that one requires a deep understanding of historical transformation to fully understand musical tradition. And that the history we're talking about is not just the history of forms and style, but the history of structural elements of the society itself. In other words, the book is not just about the history of the music. If you want to understand music, you have to understand major turning points in the history of that particular society, the structural transformation that paved the way for historical transformation. For me, before the emergence of this book, no work has been able to insert major turning points in the history of southwestern Nigeria in popular music, taking Juju as an example. So, musical traditions, in other words, cannot be dissociated from the broader historical evolution of a particular society. In Christopher Waterman's meticulous hand, we learn about the history of Lagos. We learn about the history of Ibadan. Remember, this book is only one out of numerous scholarly production. Some of his scholarship goes so deep in Yoruba culture that I ask myself, how did someone find time to actually do all this? So this book is only a fraction of his cumulative scholarship. In fact, so many of his brilliant works and brilliant ideas about the Yoruba are not in this book, but nonetheless, they have actually informed my scholarship. One of them is an article that he co-wrote or co-published with Karim Baba, which places Oriki, Yoruba place poetry, at the center of Fuji. Another one also engages with the question, with a very brilliant conversation about musical videos. So, so I discovered Christopher Waterman's book by accident. While I was writing my doctoral thesis in 2007 at the University of Texas, I Googled prostitution in Lagos, and I was taken directly to this book. I thought the Google result was wrong, but nonetheless, it was right, because Christopher Waterman referenced a genre of music called asiko in colonial Lagos, and that music referenced prostitution. That is how you recognize classics. Classics are works that are meant to engage a particular problem, but at the same time, they are broad and expansive enough to throw you in different directions. And while his treatment of prostitution is just 2 or 3 lines, it actually provides an insight that allows me to begin to engage prostitution as one element of a much broader conversation about urbanization. On the one hand, the book is about juju, it's about popular culture. On the other hand, 1 or 2 references to prostitution then takes me back to understanding sophisticated, if you like, complicated story of how men and women in colonial Lagos engage one another. However, I did not begin to actually engage with Christopher Waterman works until 2019, when I began my project, my current book project on Fuji music. As always, I emailed him to Juba to give appeasement to the gods of the field and tell them that I'm here. I'm interested in things that you're also interested in, and I would like to stay in touch to engage you occasionally. Of course, I was happy that he replied to me and enthusiastically. And of course, it may appear very simple that you emailed one of the leading scholars in the field. But when you get that kind of response, it's kind of affirmation that it gives. And I'm very grateful that he replied to that email. So I'm not going to go do a little bit deep into what I'm trying to do with my presentation, which is about what I consider to be the major traits of African popular music scholarship after 1990 when this book came out. My conversation is going to be panoramic. It's just going to be a few comments on how I see the field, what has happened, the growth that has happened over the years. One of the core elements that we see in recent time are biographical scholarship on famous artists. So, of course, Christopher's work also engages with a lot of artists, Dele Ojo and others. But what we begin to see are dedicated biographical works that uses an artist as a way to engage a musical tradition. One of the most famous in this category is Fela. Since Fela died in 1997, there's been a lot of works on him. Whether it is Olaniyan's book or whether it is Olorunyomi's book, we see scholarship that tends to use biographical dimension to engage music. On the one hand is biography, on the other hand is musical traditions. How much is biographical and how much is about music can be very debatable, and of course can be very imbalanced. But what is fascinating is that scholars are beginning to see the need to do dedicated scholarship, full-length scholarship on renowned artists. That's biographical dimension. The second element I think I've seen is additional scholarship on hip hop and Afrobeat. The managers of hip hop and Afrobeat has also expanded scholarship on African popular music. And in this wise, we see scholars writing thematic articles. Maybe I call them representational scholarship. This scholarship has to do with identifying element of a particular element in a particular music. For example, migration in a particular music. For example, gender and sexuality in a particular music. Most of them are journal articles produced mostly by up and coming scholars. But I'm not going to critique them. That's all. I'm not going to critique by saying that they're mostly representational and they're always about content reading of those articles. But what is actually shaping all these new works? I'm going to talk about that shortly. The third trend I see is the role that social media has played in the expansion of African popular music. The way we produce, the way we share, and the way we consume music has changed radically. Not only because we have moved from the era of CD to Spotify and others, but also because social media has transformed musical virality. That way, it's not just about sound anymore, and of course, it's also about sight. And we have seen a lot of scholarship that is trying to marry the beauties of visual representation with audio representation. And what do we get out of this? Now, what are the major transformations that's actually shaping all these works? It is one thing for scholars to write. It is another thing for us to map out the enabling environment or the structural or intellectual traditions that are shaping it. One element would be that the digital culture has changed. In the past, sometimes when I think about what it takes for Chris to write this book, I ask myself, it's probably like going to record shop, hunting, going from one record shop to another, buying CDs. Who knows how many buying he has in his home? Today, digital technology has changed how we produce and consume. And because music is far more accessible now than at any point in period, it makes accessibility easy. And accessibility is also a major factor in scholarly production because music is considered not only as text, but also as a way of seeing the world. And what scholars have done in a very large extent is to see these materials to see music as text. The second element, of course, has its own problematics because copyright problems and all these things are there. For Christopher Waterman to reproduce a lot of music, a lot of text, music for this book, he must get a lot of copyright. Today, a lot of colleagues are publishing directly or text from music without getting copyright. So that's his own problem about this. The second one, to run quickly, is the expansion of African music departments across Nigerian institutions and globally. When Chris Amodan was writing this book, I think that if my brain is telling me, I don't think that any university in Nigeria has a dedicated music department. I'm talking about in the 70s. This book was published in 1990, but the research started, I think, in the 70s. So in the 70s, I'm not aware there's any dedicated Department of Music in any Nigerian institution. Maybe Nsukka has, I'm not sure, but definitely UI does not have, definitely IFE does not have, and of course, definitely UNILAG does not have a dedicated music department. They have a unit. But now there's a major expansion, not only in universities, but also in polytechnic. And then the field is moving from a purely musicological into cultural studies. Many times the willingness of our friends and colleagues in the English department to begin to write not just African literature, but of course to consider music as African literature. So what we begin to see is that so many colleagues in the English department who are not trained as musicologists are getting into popular scholarship writing. We know the challenge. The problem is that they treat this text as, I'm not going to call it polemic, but I don't want to critique. The challenge, okay, the issue is that they treat the music as text, the way they will read Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, the way they will read other kinds of follow. And so the good news is that we're having the rise of a lot of department of music in Ibadan. Ibadan has a department of music. And just 2 days ago, University of Lagos voted to have a new faculty of creative art, which will have a unique, a standalone department of music. These developments have major implication. They have major implication on scholarship of African music. 2 more minutes before the chair asks me to stop. What is my place here? I'm writing a book, which is currently not writing. Actually, I'm done. So I just finished a book on Fuji, which is currently with Oxford University Press, evaluating it. And then I'm making documentaries. The first episode of the documentary came out last year. The second episode on women is coming out in March. So my own intervention as a historian, again, I'm not a musicologist, and I was just telling Dr. Barron that I cannot write musical notes. And so if you guys come after me, I don't know but I'm just going to tell you I can't write musical notes. So I am a historian who is interested in historical transformation transition. And when I decided to write a book on Fuji, I wanted a scholarship that transcends studying the music itself, but studying the society, studying the people, from the women who were mothers, who provided the resources, the spiritual support and all support to the wives, to the daughters, to the patroness, to the lovers, to the wives, everything, to music producers, to owners of hotels, even to songwriters. For me, scholarship on African music has focused too much on the artists themselves. And the implication is that it does not give what Dr. Rosemary Popola wants to always like to identify as epistemic justice. Because in epistemic justice, we are recognizing the role and the contribution of a wide range of people. So when you focus too much on the artist, you are not able to identify the roles that a wide range of people play. So my scholarship goes beyond just focusing on the artist and the music itself to understanding the major structural transformation that happened, not just before the 90s, not just from the 1970s when Fuji emerged as a distinct style, but before the 1960s. So different chapters focus on different thematic aspects, like musical videos, like gender and sexuality. I have 2 chapters on women alone, and I have 2 chapters that engages how the forms transform over the time and the major responsibility. And of course, I have a chapter that I love a lot on diaspora, the reason how Fuji became a global phenomenon. And each of these chapters in the book is actually an episode in the documentary. That's the way it is formed. Hopefully, I'll be able to complete the documentary in the next 10 years because 10 episodes. Second episode coming out. So I would like to, as I complete, I know that Christopher Waterman has been battling a lot of medical challenges in recent times. He's been sick, he's been hospitalized several times. And each time I comment on his pictures on Facebook, I write to encourage him in the most effective way I think I could. I can't say flowers, real flowers. I'm Yoruba, we don't sell flowers. But the flowers we send, what we send, I think, is more than the performative element of flowers. What we send are prayers. thoughtful words that I think could help him get well. So I would like to conclude by saying that Arapapa la betu, ibi kìjàkìjà la bàbọn, òjòjò kì í sowó kó mọ̀ lè nájà. Chris Kokoko Larotale, thank you.
Thank you so much. Now you see why someone told me yesterday that I'm organizing a mini conference in the middle of a bigger conference. And you can attest to the fact that this is a Nobel laureate kind of presentation that has so many parts that we can unpack all day. But thank you again, Professor Saida Denrito, for creating time out of a very busy schedule during a very important conference to make a presentation here. So we'll move right away to the next presenter, Dr. Bali Davo, from the Department of Music at the University of Jos, who will be making his presentation today on Dantala
Dantala.
Yes, popular music, filling the space and bridging the divide. Over to you, sir. Kindly, I ask that you use just 12 minutes so we can have more time for question and answer. You're
All
welcome.
right. Thank you so much. I believe, can you hear me loud and clear?
Sure, we can.
Okay. The presentation is an examination of cultural assertions and issues of modernity in Dantala's Ndendeng music. Dantala is the name of a popular traditional artist here in Plateau State. And then the type of music he does is called Ndendeng music. So let me just dive into the presentation. The introduction, let me go through the introduction. The contemporary social, political, and religious landscape of Plateau State in Nigeria is characterized by infusion of cultural materials into everyday activities for the purpose of identity, of commerce, and the identity could be negotiated in like geographical location, by ethnicity, gender, religious, educational, and status, political lines, etc. Those are the means where people are able to identify themselves with. And then we go to cultural identity as identified by Waterman himself, who he describes cultural identity as that it may be viewed as rational and conjunctural rather than self-constituting and essential, and that this may have relevance to the way we present the relationship of traditional and modernity in ethnomusicology. So I look at this in the sense that in this way that it depends on how one is able to present himself to the general public. You present yourself, especially to people who are foreign to your culture. That is the way they identify with you. How you present yourself is the way people usually would identify with you. And then identity could be linked to the narrative of individuals, how they tell the world about how they want to be seen and perceived. These could be constructed along both self and collective lines. So it depends on how one, like I said earlier on, how one presents himself to the world, how they see him or how they see you for what you're doing. Now, self-identity provides the impetus for self-continuity, which helps individuals meaningfully connect different points of their past lives to arrive at the present. So I believe the Yoruba people have their descent, for their Oduduwa descent. Everybody has a genealogy where they can be traced from. You look at like here in Plateau State, they will tell you most of the people came from the Sahel region through the Meduguri axis by migration. Now let's dive into Dantala. Let's know who Dantala is and his type of music and what he does. Dantala has attempted to negotiate between individual and collective identity in his musical works. Although building upon cultural musical materials, he develops unique musical works that are unmistakably African, yet particularly unique, both in instrumentation, performance, dance forms, etc. His collective identity is expressed through projecting African cultural music materials in his works. Now, Dantala is a typical traditional music artist, and in my conversation with him, I got to understand that I asked him questions of why are you now using Western instruments in your traditional music ensemble? And the answer he gave me was that in the late 90s, when he was 80s to the late 80s through the early 90s, when he started his music career, he told me that the instruments he used, especially the traditional local drums and other instruments, overshadows the voice when he's trying to sing, and then which is a small rap zither instrument which is handheld like this and is played like this. So without amplification, one can't really hear what the instrument sounds like. So he decided to begin to incorporate Western musical instruments into his performances by adding microphones to power to amplify the deng itself, and of course using instruments like the bass guitar, using the piano, using drums. But along these things that one would think that, okay, since he's now bringing Western instruments into his traditional musical orchestra, it will dilute the content of the music. But Dantala carefully picked these instruments and assigned traditional roles for these instruments to play instead of the music, the instruments to play along the Western idiom style that everybody is conversant with. He decides to assign, for instance, on the piano doesn't play anything more than the pentatonic scale on the piano, which is typical of African music. So you find the piano playing only pentatonic scales on the traditional on the piano. Maybe they will use a xylophone tone on the keyboard so that it can be playing just the xylophone, which is amplified. And then the bass guitar is also following in those lines. And so he is able to fuse all of these instruments into his performance to amplify his cultural identity so that people can be able to understand this music, how it is being done, and people can be able to analyze. If you go online on YouTube, if you Google check Dantala, you will see his music there. You can listen to the examples of his music and see how he has been able to use these instruments in his performance. Now, in his performance medium, he does a lot of gymnastics, acrobatics, and a lot of dance in his performances. Before he begins a piece of music, he will first of all do a jazz intro of almost 8 to 10 minutes, where he just play jazz of traditional Yoruba music before he begins to sing. That's how Dantala does too. He begins the music, and then you see these acrobats come around, they dance around, they do all sorts of gymnastics, display a lot of display before the music begins. So while he's telling the story in the music, the people that are dancing on stage are also demonstrating and also acting out what he's singing in the music. For instance, if he's singing about people drinking alcohol, you could find somebody on stage who is staggering and carrying a bottle and doing as if he's being drunk. And then the story plays out even in the act, if not just in the song that the person is singing. So in the time, we know that there's this great playwright who said that the pre-independence musical and theatrical performances in Nigeria, that is, okay, I'm just trying to remember the Hubert Adesoji, Adedeji or Adesoji or somebody like that, who was a pioneer of the theater in Nigeria. And he although he studied theater arts, although he was in the theater and film arts, but he did a lot of works in music, and then he's able to set the tone that people are able to follow in such in his footsteps of how you can manage both music and theater on stage, where as the music is going on, it's just like an opera where as you sing and then people are acting out on stage. So he brought the African side to it, especially the Birom side to it, or the the Nigerian side to it. So Dantala is a man that is born here in Plateau State in a local government, in Kanke local government of Plateau State. He's in Gas by tribe. His mother used to be a minstrel. She sings a lot while he was still a small boy. So one can easily say that he got his musical genuinity from his mother, because he started his music while he was even a little boy, but going to secondary school. He usually goes around to perform for people. And today he just retired January this year from the Plateau State Ministry of Culture and Tourism, where he headed the ministry, and he has gone around the world touring with his Ndendeng music. And the good thing about it is that the Western world already know Western music. And so we as Africans, or we as Nigerians, cannot do Western music more than the Westerners, because that's their traditional music. But what is more fascinating is that for us as Africans and traditional musicians in Africa, we need to export our own culture to the Westerners, because no matter how local our instruments may look like, no matter how primitive the music may sound, it has not been heard by foreigners, by Westerners before. So it sounds new to their ears, and they would want to hear that kind of music. So they will pay any kind of amount of money to export this kind of music to other parts of the country. I remember our great professor, Professor Mekinzewi, who has gone around the world too, touring the world, just playing his African drums and his ensemble. So it is high time for us as Africans to imbibe this our music and begin to export it to other parts of the world. Because especially nowadays, because of westernization, technological advancement, a lot of things people can make, even if you're not a composer, if you're not literate in music, one can easily make music with artificial intelligence now. And then we now forget about this traditional music that has been passed down from generations to generations through our forefathers. Now, if we don't take care, in the next maybe century, all this traditional music, all this ethnomusicology, all this music we hear around that are traditional, will now be left in the history shelves, where they would say once upon a time there was this type of music, but people don't know. Let's take, for instance, the language we speak, our indigenous languages now. A lot of parents who are married from both the same tribe, Yoruba versus Yoruba, but they now speak English to their children instead of speaking the native Yoruba language. So if care is not taken, our indigenous African music is going to be fizzled out without any form of recourse. Now, in Dendeng, like I said earlier on, in Dendeng is a local raf zita, is made from the upper part of the bamboo, where they put sand inside and they make strings out of it, and then it's tuned to a pentatonic scale. It's a local instrument, and it's found predominantly around here on the plateau. Maybe when next there's going to be this conference, I will bring a lot of these instruments. It's just that I am very busy here. That's why I couldn't make it to Lagos for this conference, even though I plan to take some of these instruments and the music itself, so that one can see them and one can relate with them. But like I also said, please, you can feel free to go online, check for Dantala. You can hear the example of the music of Dantala's music there online. So I think I do want to bore you much, because I really have a lot to say, but I think the time constraint is low. So cultural assertion is fundamental to our music performance in Nigerian societies for the purpose of self and cultural identity, as this provides cultural authenticity to such musical works. However, in a globalized world that we are today, assimilating musical materials from other cultures are absolutely inevitable. So if we know that they are inevitable, but if we can accept the Western instruments to use as indigenous, let the indigenous instruments, or the Western instruments, play the role of our indigenous music instead of playing that of the Western. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I can let you know that however brief your presentation was, it has enriched, the purpose and the goal for which this panel was organized. And just also want to add, in future, if you want to bring the ensemble and the cultural players of this instrument, LSA is more than happy to have you. So we'll move next right to the third presenter for today, Oluwatosin Ibitoye, who's been a regular on my panel, and I want to thank you for your continuity and commitment, to the scholarship of music and cultural studies more broadly. So over to you, kindly 12 minutes so we can have room for Q&A. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon. I am Oluwatosin John Ibitoye. My presentation is titled Reimagining the Celebrity Identity in Christopher Waterman's Framing of the Masked One. I will start by way of introduction that within the realities of globalization, which has of course raised issues of identity crisis, issues of originality and sustainability, Yoruba popular music has evolved with the reinvention and reimagination of old genres in new idiosyncratic forms. So my study particularly reflects on Christopher Waterman's framing of the Masked One, Lagbaja, and how Lagbaja reimagines Yoruba popular music in his idiosyncratic Africano music. I interrogate Lagbaja's identity construct within the framework of Austin Emelu's progressive traditionalism in the making of celebrity identity in the global digital age. On Christopher Waterman's models of celebrity, my study particularly stems from Christopher Waterman's 2002 discourse on models of the celebrity self in Yoruba popular music in Nigeria, particularly how Waterman examined the models of celebrity on the tripod metaphor of what he calls big man, black president, and the masked one. So I particularly asked, what would it mean to have an identity as a popular musician? And what does the making of a celebrity identity in global digital age entail? So, because when you look at these three distinctive models of celebrity as discussed by Christopher Waterman, these models embodied specific in their own way that distinguishes between the inner identity, the outer identity, the private identity, and the public dimensions of identity. Waterman's thesis particularly stems from the notion and observation that African popular musicians serve as role models for their audiences. This is because African popular musicians have some form of imaginative modeling of social identities and creation of new public. So it is important of this and how they can serve progressive humane ends. When you look at there is what we call the big man. Is the celebrity was cultivated. Hear me?
We can hear you. I'm trying to get them. LSA, can you kindly mute your hand so we can have a coherent house?
So the first model as conceived by Christopher Waterman is the celebrity personnel cultivated by performers of Yoruba language popular music genres such as Juju and Fuji, and how these genres have been polished to a fine gleam to become more of a global music genre by complex patron clientage networks through superstar musicians such as Alhaji Dr. Sikiru Ayinde Barrister and King Sunny Ade. The second model of celebrity self in Waterman's framing is what he calls the Black President, and that was embodied by Fela Anikulapo Kuti, who is, of course, the pioneer of Afrobeat music. Fela's popularity particularly rested largely on the lack of perceived distance between the private self and the public persona. anywhere you see Fela, Fela is Fela. Either you meet him on the street, on stage, in the Kalakuta shrine, anywhere, Fela maintains that personality, that individuality that he is known for. And then this was, of course, central to his authority as a musician and as a political icon. The third model of celebrity self, which is the core of my study, is the masked one. And the masked one in this context is Lagbaja. And Lagbaja is a contemporary Yoruba musician whose performative projection incorporates that big man identity in Juju as well as Fuji, yet also restricts and resists some of these features in this genre, as well the Afro-Burghese radical charisma of Fela Anikulapo Kuti. The theoretical framework which I hinged this study on is Austin Emilu's progressive traditionalism. And this progressive traditionalism centers around the idea that tradition can remain rooted while still being authentic. I mean, as traditions evolve in innovation, the authenticity can still be there. It is a process where cultural tradition evolve through creative innovation while remaining grounded in their roots. Emphasis in progressive traditionalism is revitalizing tradition and not abandoning tradition. This is because cultural vitality actually comes from creative tension of embracing new influences while honoring heritage. So the masked one, which I examined, is celebrity identity. That's Lagbaja, Bisade Ologunde, and of course his Africano music ensemble. Lagbaja, the masked musician, he wears the mask as an iconic symbol of mass facelessness. It particularly represents the nobody, the voiceless in the society, the faceless in the society, particularly in Nigeria, and of course in reference to other parts of Africa. Lagbaja, who is also Bisade Ologunde, he intentionally refers to himself as the musician, while Bisade Ologunde is the producer representing Lagbaja. Of course, it tries to create two different identities. That's a form of private subject and public icon. While Lagbaja is the public icon, the private subject is Bisade Ologunde, right? So because of different brewing controversies in the type of music that Lagbaja makes, in the type of style that Lagbaja does. There have been controversies. Is his music Afrobeat? Is his music highlight? Music juju? Is his music crossover? So because of this different controversy, Lagbaja christened his music in 2005 as Africano, and he defines his Africano as a music that has a driving resurgence of interest in sophisticated African music that is rich in traditions, but of course cosmopolitan in attitude. This is because of the particular central role that indigenous Yoruba drums and rhythms plays in his groove. When you look at the mass concept that Lagbaja adopts, in Yoruba traditional culture, mask concept is known with the traditional Yoruba masquerade called Egungun. But for Lagbaja, this mask is beyond mere costumes or mere stage appearance. It is an idiosyncratic philosophy, an artistic appeal, a symbol of identity for him. There are apart from being a voice for the voiceless, there are two other reasons why Lagbaja adopts this mask concept. One is the fact that this mask concept becomes an easy tool for recollection from the audience. Oh, audience can easily recollect that, oh, that musician that is always on mask, that musician that always put on mask. It becomes an easy tool for recollection from the audience, and also he adopts that mask concept from the desire to live a private life that is devoid from the glitz and glamour that comes with the popular show music business, or the showmanship that comes with popular music and celebrity personnel. So by adopting this mask identity, by adopting this mask concept, Lagbaja automatically transforms himself into a kind of negative, a negative celebrity. That is a popular star, a popular face, with no face particularly attached. That's a form of negative celebrity identity. And when you look critically at his music, you find extensive use of traditional music, particularly emphasis is placed on extensive use of traditional drums ensemble, the bata drums, the dundun drums, gongon drums, ogido drums, as well as sakara drums ensemble. Of course, as we know in traditional Yoruba music and in several African cultures, drums play diverse roles in our culture. The same thing in Lagbaja's ensemble. These drums play diverse roles in his Africano ensemble as a way of reflecting his roots, his tradition, his culture, from creating the grooves to stimulating dance to acting as speech surrogates, imitating the human voice. Of course, you regularly hear Lagbaja acknowledging the roles these drums and these drummers play in his ensemble and the roles they contribute to his groove and his identity. You hear me say, Oni bata yo kare, that would mean well done, my bata drummer, or Oshe bata, which means thank you, bata drums. Right. So these roles that these drums play are evident in many of his songs, like Ponko Below, Lulu Fun, Sweet Melody, and Omojai Jai. Of course, again, in his ensemble, you would see him promoting traditional costumes of Yoruba culture, traditional outfits, traditional fashion. Apart from being associated with the identity of the mask, he will always have traditional fabrics in his ensemble. I mean, his ensemble members are always on traditional fabrics and traditional styles. For instance, when you check Lagbaja's Kenteles Kondolo, you will hear a sophisticated celebration of the traditional Yoruba ceremonial style, which is prevalent in our Owambe culture, the geles, the filas. For instance, in his Kenteles Kotolo, you see many of these designs like Core, Umbrella, Labalaba, Ice Cream, Ceiling Fan, Lukumo, National Theatre, and a host of others. Finally, Lagbaja, as an Africano musician, he creates a synchronization of indigenous and Western musical instruments. Particularly, he brings global cultures into local context by synchronizing, for instance, he would synchronize bata drums and the B-flat tenor saxophone, which has become the most pronounced musical instrument in his ensemble and have formed a part of his musical identity. So Lagbaja localizes this global saxophone to tell indigenous story. These instances are seen in his music like Bagada Gogodo and Never Far Away and many of others. I conclude that Lagbaja's concept of identity within the celebrity self in Yoruba popular music is established on the absence of identity in itself. That is a non-celebrity popular star, a form of negative celebrity, which is an existential progression from the big man identity that is associated with Yoruba Juju and Fuji, and that radical charisma that is associated with Fela Anikulapo's Afrobeat. So I conclude that Lagbaja's performative reimagination of this negative celebrity and the incorporation and resistance of groups of big man's Jew, black man's Afrobeats, they shape the identity constructs of his idiosyncratic African music. So this would go on to teach popular musicians, music enthusiasts, and audience alike about the complexities of performed identity. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. Like I said, this is supposed to be a mini conference or a symposium because there's so much ideas coming on. And like Professor Said Adenrito mentioned, this book is just, one of these many contributions, and anchoring your presentation on its four model of celebrity in popular music means a lot to this panel. Thank you for enriching this celebratory panel. So I'll go into my own presentation and I'll try to be brief as much as I can so that we can have room for questions. So please, if you do have question or comment, we will have time to sort of take in your presentation, your question at some point. So the scholarship on popular music in Africa, my presentation, by the way, is titled Genre, Gender, and Generation: Unfinished Business in Christopher Waterman's book, Juju, A Social History and Ethnography of an African Popular Music. By way of introduction, the scholarship on popular music in Africa and African music broadly, both African music in Africa and African music in the diaspora, stretches across multiple genres. In Africa and in Nigeria in particular, the list of genres are inexhaustible. In the diaspora, the elasticity of genre extend from blues to jazz to hip hop, gospel, and more. And the musical flow or cultural borrowing between African and African diaspora music has been widely documented. C.C. Judge's book, Stereo in Africa, about modernity in Africa and the cultural flow remain one of those important book in this regard. And several other scholars like J.C. Weaver Shipley and Kibona Clark, as among many others, have sort of examined the cultural flow between Africa and the African diaspora, the nuances, the overlaps, and the details in the various forms of music and their thematic. My presentation today pays attention to one of the books that shaped the field of African popular music beyond Nigeria and Africa, extending to the diaspora. In my presentation today, the argument I'm making is that Waterman's Juju, A Social History and Ethnography of an African Popular Music, which is a 7-chapter book with technical notes and a glossary, offer us 4M, letter M, and also that future direction for research, which I call unfinished business. First and foremost, I'd like to emphasize why I'm using M, the letter M, M for mango in this regard, because I think that Nigerians are familiar with MMM, the money scam, but I just want to sort of turn a negative idea in a positive light by examining what I call the contribution of Christopher Waterman along 4M. The 4M are as identified below. In terms of message, methodology, meaning, and the man Waterman himself. The future direction that I think his work offer have also thematically arranged along the lines of gender, genre, and generation. And as part of my conceptual clarification, what I call unfinished business is simply future direction for research. Unfinished business as a continuing work, future agenda, a guide into the continuity of the knowledge form that is called African popular music. And so Waterman as an intellectual elder has lit at such inspire possible direction. It's those possible directions that I call unfinished business. And this possible direction, like I said, I've thematically arranged into 4 major streams, which is gender, genre, and generation. So in the first part of my presentation, I'll focus on what I call the landmark contribution to the field along the 4 letter M's that I identify, which is the message, the methodology, the meaning, and of course, the man Waterman himself. So in terms of message, in chapter 1, like I said, the book is a 4-chapter book in which Waterman makes significant contributions. And one of the message, or I will put the message, the method, the meaning, and the man himself together in this first part of the presentation. In chapter 1, Waterman pays attention to the cultural and transatlantic flow that shape popular music development in urban Africa. As Professor Adenrita mentioned in his presentation earlier, urbanity is central to the book, even though it's about popular music, because popular music developed within the evolving colonial urban center in which Lagos represents. So in centering the cultural flow of the varieties of people and borrowing from which the Juju developed itself, the transnational flow of people also that constitute Lagos remain an important message he wants us to identify, that Juju was shaped by the various tributaries of people and ideas in colonial Lagos. And this idea of cultural hybridity and the mixed pot of salad that Lagos was in the 20th century offer us the way to think about popular music and Juju in particular, which it focuses on beyond just an indigenous African music, but an African music that borrows in terms of instruments, in terms of organization, and in terms of even patronage and client politics that shape Juju music. And this chapter in particular reminds us of Paul Gilroy's Black Atlantic and the flow of Black culture, people, and ideas. Paul Gilroy and Atlantic, as we understand, is a syncretic pattern in which styles, forms of the Caribbean, United States, and Africa collide into different yet similar forms. And here we're reminded of intermixing and cultural hybridity as easily seen in Juju. He argued, as he has argued, Yoruba terminologies and concepts are greatly influenced by Neo-African traditional religions of the Caribbean and South Africa and the practice of Cuban Santeria. This similar argument about the ways in which African music and juju, in the case that Waterman study, sort of borrows from each other, borrow from different form of cultural practices, both within the continent and outside of it. In chapter 2, it's sort of in chapter 2 of the book, reminds us about the periodization of the development of juju, which he mapped into two. In chapter 2, he focused on early juju, which was much of 19th and 20th century, and that in the late modern juju, of which he identified Ebenezer Obey and the likes of them as, influential to this particular season. So in paying attention to the historical context and the development of urban networks in Lagos, Waterman's significant contribution is that we look at popular music intersectionally, identifying not just the multiple identities and the various social locations of not just the drummers, the musicians themselves, but the various individuals and sections that contribute to what we know as popular music itself. And of course, in chapter 5, he examined, juju itself in Ibadan and the social and the aesthetics of juju as a form of aria, a form of what I call some few days in a post Italawa recreation. And of course, in chapter 7, he focused on music and inequality in modern Yoruba society, especially the role of the hall boom of the 70s, the late 60s and 70s, in the development and of an equal relationship in which music as a way of perpetuating inequality, especially in the patron-client dynamics that shape popular music. So in terms of methodology, one important point I also want to make, as Professor Adenrito made earlier, is that we study music beyond textual analysis to consider the historical, the cultural, the institution. For instance, both formal and informal, acknowledged and unacknowledged tributaries that shape music. As some of the presenters mentioned, popular music study tends to focus on sometimes the artist alone without considering other marginal subaltern cultures within popular music. Professor Darito focused on, for instance, prostitutes and prostitution within, popular music and claims. So what are the meaning, like I said, I've emphasized is that music cannot be studied in isolation, but we have to consider the various cultural forms that coalesce around not just the genre, but the ways in which this subcultures within the main culture mutate and morph into one another. And then I'll focus on the man, Waterman himself. Waterman is a scholar who not only embed himself within the scholarly knowledge production, but also in the cultural ethos of the people, their way of life and their way of being. So I thought that he was going to be here today, and I wanted to punk a joke at him about one of the lessons he teaches me about field notes and field note practice. So in the book, he had talked about going to this Fuji party, and on getting there, he was more involved in writing his field notes, and then somebody had to smack him playfully to say, no, this is not where to write field notes. You need to carry the microphone or do one of those things. So I haven't talked about his contribution in terms of method, in terms of message, in terms of meaning, and the man himself. What then are the future direction that his work offer for us in African popular music study? As I said earlier, I was a young girl who wanted to quit academia because I believe I didn't have much to offer, not because I wasn't intelligent, but because the academia has a way of just pushing out its best, aising its best, and there are more to say that I won't take into. But then going into popular music scholarship, Professor Adenrito has introduced me to the work of Professor Kito Waterman, and reading his book, I identified all of the significant contributions that I mentioned earlier along the lines of method and the meaning and the message and the man. But what are the future direction? The first future direction has to be in terms of genre. Waterman's work did focus on juju, and several people have drawn on his work to examine other genres of African popular music. But then I think that his work is also as an elder, leaving us, footprints for future work in terms of reimagining and re-envisioning genre as fluid and queer. I was privileged to design and teach a course on queer African in the spring of 2025. And one of the things I emphasize to my students is to think about queerness beyond sexuality, but to think about the sense of queerness in terms of borderlessness, openness, fluidity, borderlessness, the ways in which we can no longer have a policing of boundaries, not only for artists themselves, because artists are also fluid in how they're sort of borrowing from culture, from different genres in order to make new genre or even to create a mismatch. But I would think about the openness of genre and that I will begin to blend genre alongside each other. For instance, how do new suburban culture borrow Fuji aesthetics or genre predominantly framed within heterosexual musical consumption or production into queer politics? And in that regard, at the ASA conference in November, I'll be making a presentation about how a queer the first openly lesbian artist, Temi Owasa, is appropriating Fuji aesthetics, uh, um, Fuji ideas and Fuji worldview and framing and music for, queer politics. So the future direction has to do in terms of reimagining genre. Secondly, to think about, as Professor Adenrita has also mentioned, the role of technology, especially platformization, in not only blending new and old genre, but also in creating new ways of imagining old forms. Particularly, I want to emphasize about the genre blending that has been viewed only in terms of sampling. I think that sampling is a limited way of thinking about the genre, the borrowing between older and newer generation. I'm thinking future work should begin to look at it within the sense of indigenous worldview about a continuity of communication between the current contemporary generation and the ancestors. What are the ways that, for instance, new genres are updating, reusing creativity and technology and sampling and limited framework? For instance, I thought I was going to be able to play Fujigabe by Zelensky, in which, it sort of prefaced the intro with a clip, a moment, the playing of a musical instrument from Fujigabe by Dr. Sikiri Ayinde Barrister, and Fowles in his recent music, no less, also repeated the same. So what are the form of future direction in terms of gender? I think that Professor Waterman's book, not out of a malicious intent, focused more on male popular music artists. So how do we account for silence and marginalization and erasure? For instance, I think that popular music scholarship in the line of gender and sexuality seems to focus too much on objectification, sexualization, and commodification, which is important. But what are the other forms of sexuality? Like I said, what are the ways that, for instance, gender shape patronage? Do men patrons require sex instead of just spending money? What about, the place of people? So I'm thinking that we have to rethink also the historicity of popular music itself to account for the voices of the like of Arias Carter, who to my mind has been made to disappear from the historiography of popular music, and others like him that we don't get to know because of epistemic process do not pay attention to marginalized voices. There's more to say, but I will conclude by saying the key point of my presentation is that the continuation of work that is finished and yet unfinished in Christopher Waterman's book leave for her something to build on, extend, expand, recreate, reconstitute without boundaries of gender, without the policing of genre, and without with the consideration of generation. And I didn't have much to focus on generation because of the time that we have left. So I think that the baton that Professor Christopher Waterman's work hands over to us is to begin to expand beyond thematics, to begin to think beyond just generation in terms of collaboration, but also what kind of tension does generation portend in terms of conflict? Professor Adenrita had mentioned earlier, but I also wanted to add about the conflict between Oshukpa and Portable. What sort of tension do we see in terms of intellectual property that technology has come to add to the dynamics of popular music studies? So to round up again, I'm thankful to Professor Christopher Watersman for his important book that, like I said, which has made contribution to us in terms of method that he offers, in terms of meaning and message that he offers to us about African popular music, but also the future direction that he offers in terms of gender, in terms of genre, in terms of generation. And so thank you everyone for listening. So we'll open the floor for question and comment from the floor, from online, to the presentation. If you do have questions, you can send to us in the comments online, or you can raise your hand right there, and then we'll allow you to. Is there a hand raised?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for your presentation. I want to comment on Dr. Jericho's presentation. I find that we're feeling also, media communication, we should have a lot of media communication, strategy, English as well. And we also study.
Please, can you kindly use the mic close to you? I can't seem to hear you well. And I imagine that for other online community, other members of the online community.
Okay, yeah, I hope it's better now. So I said it's a very interesting session. I'm in media and communication, and I'm commenting on Professor Derrito's presentation. It seems to have missed the fact that people in media and communication are also studying music a lot now. And I agree that we also study it more from the textual angle. And okay, so I'm inspired by his perspective, and I hope we can also expand how we look at music. But I feel like I want to call his attention to the fact that we are also studying music in media and communication, and then we look at it in terms of, okay, now it depends on the orientation of the media scholar now. So sometimes we look at it from the feminist angle, sometimes we look at it from indigenous language perspectives, and sometimes we look at it in relation to sociology. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comment.
Can I respond to that quickly? So
sure, you can, sir.
Yeah, and I'm going to be brief. So one of the problems we have is an expansion in the scholarship of popular music without an expansion in ethnography. So the problem is that we study music without studying the people, without studying the heart, without studying the bigger social structure. And the representational scholarship dimension allows people to be able to produce something without actually engaging with the artist. So for me, I belong to a community of artists, a community of practice, and I've integrated myself into that community. And I've written extensively about the problem of commodification of information today, which makes ethnography very difficult. So on the one hand, representational scholarship allows us to write and publish. On the other hand, representational scholarship does not allow us to actually engage with humans. And because we're having an expansion in scholarship on humans, we're not actually engaging the community that's producing this work. It's also very problematic because we are not giving the right attention. We're not seeing them as intellectuals. We're not seeing their contribution to helping us. So when I go out to do my ethnography, the problem I always encounter is that these academics don't care about us because they just want to take our stories and write. So, and I've also written about the question of extractive practices even within African studies. And when people talk about extractive practices, they're always talking about Western scholars coming to Africa to, gather data, mine data, and then not giving a damn about the people, about the culture, and of course, about the community that gives them data. In Nigerian studies, in scholarship on Nigerian studies, extractive practice is happening between this university and the neighborhood called Abule Oja, because the scholarship produced here does not connect what is going on in the community. And the scholars here are extracting ideas without even thinking and caring about the people that is producing it. In other words, you can still continue to produce knowledge in Unilag without even respecting the owners of the knowledge, even though the knowledge owners are actually right across the road. So one of my own critiques, and I try not to critique again, is that we need to go back to Christopher Waterman's style. We need to go back to Karim Baba's style. We need to go back to Aki Uba's style, to Obidike's style. Ethnographically sophisticated scholarship on African music that goes beyond just taking the music, listening to a track, and saying you're going to write an entire article based on the track. And so I'm just going to write about feminism and feminist scholarship in Tiwa Savage song. Why this is important, why this is adding to the body of knowledge, it does not allow us to see scholarship on music beyond just writing about music. That is where my problems lie. And that is what I would like to consider as one of the major contributions of my own scholarship: hardcore ethnography, deep historical scholarship, connecting with the community, fighting extractive practices, and making sure that the community don't commodify our ideas. I am a professor, I have a lot of resources, but I don't go around throwing money and giving money for information. So if I don't want graduate students to be harassed for money when they go on the field, it means that when I go on the field, even with all my money, I don't throw money around. So there's a lot of problems I would like us to be able to engage, which is far beyond this short conversation.
Thank you so much for adding to that. And I want to let the person who asked the question know that media study have a lot to, media and communication have a lot to contribute to popular music study. But like Professor Adenrita said, we have to go beyond just platformization. Oh, how many music were streamed? How is the streaming? How is the distribution of the streaming? Who is using streaming farm and all of that? Rich ethnography. So one of the things I say behind Professor Adenrita's back is that I will never follow him to another field work until when I can assure myself that I will start smoking some Igbo or something, because he has taken me to this club to see how prostitutes and sort of sex workers are central to how we consume music, the subculture of popular music itself. And at that club, I consume different degree of, cannabis, because this is where the ethnography itself happens. But, we have to, there's also a gender dynamic. He's a male and he could go into all these places. But as a woman and somebody who have a Christian, a Pentecostal Christian background, all my education, I'm still trying to adopt my mind to the possibility of thinking about all the different subculture that make up the music that we produce, that is produced, like you mentioned, prostitute, the sex worker, like you also mentioned, what about the people who keep the spaces safe? One of his canonical work that if you see me publish any book and any work and you don't see it cited, when sex threatens the state, it's not just about sexuality and nationalism, but the many intersections of this topical issue to other areas of knowledge or to other areas of the culture or the cultural production that we study. So I wonder if anyone has any question or comment. Okay, I think there's a question. It's an anonymous attendee. To follow up on the last question, what intersectional framework do you as Fuji and Juju scholar consider what retaining so that we don't erase the work of those who have come before? There are lots of scholars of popular culture who, like you, premium ethnography approaches. I can think of several work by Nigerian-based scholars who are not visible, including Olorun Yomi Ajose. Thanks. The other question, how do you not reify or reproduce these extractive practices and approaches we condemn? So kindly, the presenters can look into the questions and see if they would like to answer. So the first question is to follow up on the last question. What intersectional framework do you, as a new Fuji and Juju scholar, consider what retaining so we don't erase the work of those who have come before us? I think that I'll speak to this question about erasure, the question of marginality, the question of, those who, the works of those the scholar really mentioned. We have to be honest about the unequal dimension in global knowledge production. I'm sorry, there's a kind of, they are mowing the lawn around my apartment. And so if you find any noise, please pardon us. So as far as I'm concerned, I think that LSA particularly, and I'm not saying this because Professor Adenrita is here. I'm the kind of person that those who know me know I speak right to the issue. I think that Professor Adenrita has ensured a lot of epistemic justice for scholars on the continent and those in the diaspora, and particularly those on the continent. There have been a lot of celebratory panels in honor of those in Nigeria. And so this sense of tension of us versus them, I think we need to reframe it in a sense. I will imagine that the anonymous person raising this question, for instance, can organize panels on these people if you think they are being marginalized or erased. And I don't think that anyone is saying that the past work are not relevant. We're saying that we can expand them, we can update them, we can reconstitute them. And part of that reconstitution means that we allow new and whole generation to see where one stop and where the other can continue to sort of develop this knowledge. One of the remarkable books I read last year, which I reviewed, was by Akinwumi about everything is sampling. And one idea I left from the book is the historicity of form. Like, we consider the genealogy, not just the times of this is a new thing. There's really nothing new, even though things are new. Nobody's reinventing the wheel. We are rebuilding, we are reimagining, we are re-envisioning. I wonder if anyone wants to add to what I've said about this question.
Again, I would try to be very brief. One of the things the LSA has consistently done is to provide significant intellectual feasibility to knowledge based on Africa. And that's why the question of how much of the past is represented in the present is exactly why we're having this kind of conference. And I was just telling somebody how we spent 6.2 million naira to buy those batteries out there. So it looks, we did that yesterday because we want to increase the visibility of Africa-based scholars. We are fighting infrastructure. It's a war, serious war, and we're using money to fight it. So the point in emphasis is that the past is as valid as the present, because without the past, the present does not exist. And no matter how much we try to run away from the past, the present will always create a reason to go back to the past. And so the scholarship on music and any other creative or intellectual endeavor has to always respect the past. But what's within the context of feasibility? Okay, I don't know. Oloriyomi scholarship is feasible. The book on Fela, I don't know who wants to study anything on Fela, but does not. If you don't want to study on Fela and you have not read his book, Oloriyomi's book, I think you're not starting. What we need to do is not only to increase feasibility, but to also increase the capacity for that feasibility to be feasible. And it is through scholarship, through writing. I just gave a critique of representational scholarship that's all about writing about music without understanding the historical, the cultural, the theoretical form. So if you do ethnography, is not only about getting data. Ethnography is putting you in a situation that allows you to be able to make sense of data. So sometimes when you do ethnography, you may not even be gathering data, but being in a particular space could shape the way you're going to write about it. So what we need to do is not only to provide a platform like the LSA, the resources, the equipment, the thousands of dollars that we use in buying all this equipment that we brought from the US, but to also make sure that the scholarship is strong. And one way to improve the scholarship is to make critical criticism of the kind of scholarship we produce, so that when we do that, the feasibility we are talking about is not only going to be consistent, the feasibility is also going to stand the test of time. So I think the question about feasibility is at the center of what the LSA is doing, bringing all scholars together, regardless of their generation, regardless of their location, of their gender, their sexual orientation, of their origin, just to make sure that we can come together to build African knowledge infrastructure in a way that benefits everyone.
Thank you so much, Professor Adenrite. I wonder if Tosin and Dr. Bali can speak to how they deal with question of extractive practices in their work in a few minutes, because we have less than 7 minutes to be kicked out.
I would just like to quickly add to the existing conversation on issues of visibility. For me, I would not really agree that there is any form of erasures. For instance, when you're talking about, just like Professor Adenrite rightly said, you cannot talk about issues of visibility when we are referring to people like Oloriyomi and Ajose. These are scholars that they have made their valid contributions within scholarship. I was at Ajose's panel at LSA last year. So it's not about erasures. It's all about continuing the discourse, reinventing, and of course reimagining. And within the reality of the fact that the dynamics of knowledge production has changed within the current global digital age. So all we just need to do is not just reinvent the wheel, but think of new dynamics and new ways of advancing knowledge production in addition to existing literatures and existing frameworks.
Thank you very much for adding to that. And I also just want to say that it's also our place as scholars of Africa to keep telling younger ones about the relevance of an African-centered narrative in what we do. I'm a PhD graduate of international relations. My first PhD was in international relations. And for all of my work, I can remember before meeting Professor Adenrito engaging with African scholars. When I write about international relations, I'm writing about Cynthia Elo, A.H. Carr, and international relations scholars I was familiar with. Then Professor Adenrito read my work, my first PhD work, while I was still working on it. And within 6 months, every of the Western name that was citing and quoting were gone because of like, have you read Oyeronke? I'm like, Oyeronke is sociology and Cynthia Elo. Like, you can't write a work about Africa and Global South and not cite Oyeronke. Then he began to introduce me to African scholars through LSA book panels. I began to like, okay, no, there are our own people also thinking about this. So I think the onus is also on us as scholars to begin to ask our own people, not as a form of knowledge discrimination, but to say there are also people who have done ethnographically grounded work about the community. This is about citation politics. This is about citation justice and all of the questions that we're talking about. And I think LSA is doing its part, but we all need to keep doing our part. I'll let Dr. Bali speak about how he handles extractive issues in his own research, and then we'll call the panel a wrap. Dr. Bali?
Yes, just like you rightly mentioned, like I remember how when I was writing during my dissertation, I was also quite writing a lot of foreign scholars, and then in fact the worst thing I did was that my own supervisor, we are in the same area of specialization, I did not even cite my own supervisor, and I was called upon because I had someone who also looked at my works before I even presented to my supervisor, and he asked me, the person happens to know my supervisor, and said, "Okay, why is it that you're not referencing your supervisor in your works?" And I said, "I didn't find anything relevant." He said, "No, you have not. It means you have not read your supervisor's work." And I had to go through the works. And funny enough, things that I was looking for in foreign materials, I was spending a lot of time researching and checking other people's work out there in different journals. I found them in his local literatures, and I was able to localize it based on the theoretical frameworks that he has presented, which were already
Sure, we brought this. Because no, I'm just kidding. It's been going well since before you entered.
No, but it's from its end.
I know.
Popularized.
Yeah, regardless.
frame it to suit what you are doing. Yeah. So I believe citing a lot of local, in fact, within the academia, or not just within the academia, but even within the confines of Nigeria, if you're able to find such we should start from home, just like they say. Start from your Jerusalem. Check, unless it is that then you can now proceed to cite other people. That's how we can equally promote ourselves. Like I've been supervising undergraduate students too, and I tell them that you cannot write without quoting my own work in your own work. That's how the chain will keep growing. Thank you so much.
That's the point relevance.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to also thank Lagos Studies Association once again for giving us the platform to organize this panel. And also would like to plead with those who speak with I'm supposed to focus on generation deeply in my presentation, but I could not. Please, we have to speak to our older scholar back in Nigeria or anywhere in the world to understand the importance of intergenerational collaboration. I've written to senior scholars in Nigeria before who would not even respond to my email. And I know as academics, we are busy and all, but if somebody is trying to insert you into the conversation, but you don't want to be involved, and then you later would say, oh, yeah, centering foreign scholars more than we have. I don't think there's foreign, or there are some Africanists who are more African than some of us who call ourselves African when it comes to knowledge production. They're involved in the culture, they're involved with the people. Of course, race sort of, can twist some dimension of field work. It's possible that a white person right now in Nigeria will get more data than I did when I was in Nigeria last summer. But that should not in any way create an us versus them. And I think LSA is interested in not just amplifying the voices of new generation and new research, but also honoring the voice of our doyen and our scholars who have made significant contributions to African studies broadly. Thank you once again. I hope you continue to enjoy the conference, the food, the networking, the relationship. And again, I will continue or stop.
We eat all the food for you.
I will not stop thanking my mentor who has allowed me to remain in academia by continuously encouraging my research and everything I put forward. Thank you, everyone, and our online audience. We appreciate your presence, and we hope to see you in future LSA conference. Do have a great day and enjoy the rest of it. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Badi. I can't